The Ithari ship loomed above Earth, a silent monolith of unknown purpose. Cities around the world stood still, eyes turned toward the sky. No warnings, no threats, just its presence. Inside the United Nations crisis room, murmurs filled the air. The world's most powerful leaders and top scientists huddled together, dissecting every fragment of data. Then the signal came, a transmission, not of words, but of images, equations, and biological schematics. Complex, beautiful, terrifying. Daniel Raines watched the display unfold, arms crossed. A veteran of Earth's first interstellar contact missions, he had seen strange things before. But this was different. The equations spoke of something catastrophic. A disease, a plague. The Ithari called it Nick syndrome. Fatal, fast, absolute. A virus designed to kill at a cellular level, a relentless predator. And yet, in the streams of alien data, one revelation stood out: humans were immune. The realization sent shockwaves through the room. Immunity? How? Why? The Ithari had studied hundreds of species, but none had this resistance. Earth's brightest minds pored over the genetic code, but there was no immediate answer. Then, another transmission, a request, a meeting. Daniel stood at the foot of the towering Ithari delegate, his posture neutral but alert. The being before him, tall, ethereal, with silver skin and glowing eyes, radiated both wisdom and desperation. She introduced herself as Lyria, a scientist of the highest order. She wasted no time. "The disease will not stop," she said, her voice smooth but weighted with sorrow. "It mutates. It adapts. We have exhausted every option." Daniel kept his expression unreadable. "And you think we hold the key?" Lyria's eyes flickered. "Your DNA does, but understanding it is insufficient. We require direct integration." Silence. The meaning behind her words sank in like cold steel. Not just study, not just observation, integration. Lyria continued, unfazed by the tension in the room. "Our models suggest that hybridization with your species could produce offspring immune to Nick syndrome. If successful, we can synthesize a universal cure." A murmur of disbelief spread through the gathered human representatives. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about helping the Ithari. If Nick syndrome ever spread beyond their species, humanity's immunity could be the only line of defense. Daniel exhaled sharply. "You're asking for human volunteers to breed with your people?" Lyria met his gaze. "Not just any human. A genetically suitable candidate. Someone whose biology offers the highest probability of success." A screen flickered to life behind her. Data, calculations, and a single human profile. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wasn't special, enhanced, sure, thanks to his military service, but he was still human. Yet the numbers told a different story. His genetic markers aligned almost perfectly with what the Ithari needed. A choice was placed before him. Not a demand, not an order, a request. But the weight of it was undeniable. He turned away from the screen, exhaling through his nose. "I need time." Lyria inclined her head. "Time is not a luxury we have." Hours passed in deliberation. Ethical debates raged. Some saw it as an opportunity to forge an alliance with an advanced species. Others saw it as a violation of fundamental human principles. Daniel sat alone in his quarters, staring at his reflection. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. This wasn't just about him. It was about survival of an entire species, of possibly many species. A soft chime. His door slid open. Lyria stepped inside, her usual composure replaced with something almost human. Uncertainty. "You hesitate," she said. "Not an accusation. A statement of fact." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're asking me to father a child for the sake of survival. That's not exactly an easy decision." Lyria studied him for a long moment. "Do you believe we are so different?" He met her gaze. "I don't know." She moved closer, eyes searching his. "I studied your species long before this meeting. Humans possess something we do not. Adaptability. Resilience. a will to fight against impossible odds. That is why the virus does not consume you. That is why we need you. Her words struck deeper than he cared to admit. He had fought in wars, seen what humanity could endure. And now, that very endurance might be the key to saving an entire civilization. Another breath. A decision forming. Lyria tilted her head. Would you do it, if it were not a command but a choice? Daniel's lips pressed into a firm line. I don't take orders. But if I do this, it's on my terms. Not as an experiment. Not as an obligation. For the first time, Lyria smiled. Faint but real. Then let us make it a choice. Outside, the Ithri ship hung over the earth like an omen. Inside, the fate of two species rested in the hands of a single human. Daniel paced the sterile chamber, his mind warring against itself. The weight of his decision lingered, heavier than any battlefield he'd ever stood upon. This wasn't about duty. This was about the survival of an entire species. And yet, every fiber of his being resisted the idea of being reduced to genetics, a means to an end. Lyria sat across from him, silent, composed. But beneath her stillness was an urgency she couldn't suppress. The Ithri had no time. The disease was spreading faster than anticipated. The immune offspring had to be conceived now or the chance would be lost. You struggle with this? She finally said. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. You're asking for something that doesn't just involve science. There's more to this than DNA. Lyria tilted her head. Explain. He searched for the right words. Humans don't breed for survival. We connect. We choose. What you're asking, it's not just about creating a cure. It's about what comes after. She studied him for a long moment, eyes flickering in thought. Ithri reproduction is a calculated process. Mating pairs are selected for genetic compatibility, not emotional connection. But I understand that humans are different. Daniel sighed. It's not just different. It's what makes us human. Lyria hesitated. For the first time, something unreadable crossed her expression. Then, tell me what must happen for you to accept this. He folded his arms. I won't be forced, and I won't do this unless we do it as equals. A rare pause. Then she nodded. Agreed. The following days were spent in preparation. Scientific tests, medical screenings, ensuring the process would be safe for both of them. But it wasn't just about the science. Daniel and Lyria were forced into proximity, learning each other's mannerisms, their differences, their similarities. She was fascinated by Earth's history, by the resilience of a species that had fought through extinction-level events without the technological superiority of the Ithri. He, in turn, learned that despite their advanced civilization, the Ithri lacked something fundamental, an understanding of the chaotic, unpredictable force that was human instinct. One evening, he found her staring at a holographic projection of Earth, her silver eyes flickering in the dim light. You admire us, he observed. Lyria didn't look away. I admire what you are, a species that should not have survived, and yet you thrive. You overcome. You refuse to surrender to forces that should break you. Daniel leaned against the wall. And you think that's why we're immune? She turned to face him fully. Yes, your biology is stubborn. It fights where others surrender. It is as if every cell in your body refuses to accept defeat. Silence stretched between them. He wasn't sure why, but something about her words settled deep in his chest. Then the news came. The virus had mutated. The latest reports from the Ithri homeworld confirmed the worst-case scenario. Nick syndrome had begun adapting to target new species. Containment had failed. Earth was no longer immune. The first human infection was reported within hours. A research scientist, exposed through direct contact with a Ithri diplomat, had shown early symptoms. The virus was learning, evolving. Humanity's invulnerability was no longer absolute. Panic spread. Governments scrambled. The United Nations declared an immediate state of planetary emergency. Daniel clenched his fists as he read the latest report. We're out of time. Lyria's voice was steady, but he could hear the strain beneath it. Then we move forward. Now. There was no more hesitation. No more debate. Daniel and Lyria entered the Ithri medical chamber, the atmosphere charged with something unspoken. The process, guided by both human and Ithri science, was designed to ensure compatibility. The fusion of their genetic material had to be perfect. Failure meant extinction. As the procedure began, Daniel glanced at Lyria. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was something beyond duty in her eyes. Something he hadn't seen before. Trust. Hours passed. The advanced Ithri technology accelerated the process, ensuring conception took hold. Lyria's body adapted quickly, her biology synchronizing with the new life forming within her. The hybrid embryo was stable. The first successful fusion of human and Ithri DNA. The news spread like wildfire. For the first time since the crisis began, hope flickered at the edge of oblivion. But hope was dangerous. Not all Ithri agreed with this path. To some, it was an abomination, a betrayal of their purity, and they were willing to do anything to stop it. A coded transmission intercepted by Earth's intelligence agencies confirmed their worst fears. A rogue Ithri faction, radical and violent, had declared war on both the humans and their own kind, and their first target was the child. The mountain facility was locked down, every entrance sealed, every security measure activated. But Daniel knew it wouldn't be enough. The Keepers weren't the kind to retreat. They would regroup, adapt, and strike again. And this time, they wouldn't stop until either the child was dead or every last one of them was. Lyria lay on the medical table, her body trembling from the strain. The hybrid child was coming faster than anyone had anticipated. Human births were unpredictable. Ithri births were clinical, controlled. But this was something entirely new. The medical team worked in frantic coordination, scanning, adjusting, preparing for possibilities they had never encountered before. Daniel stood guard, rifle in hand, his body rigid with tension. He had never felt this kind of fear before. Not in war, not in the face of death. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about something bigger. The first contraction hit Lyria hard. She bit down on her lip, refusing to cry out, refusing to show weakness. But Daniel could see it. She was scared. He moved closer, his voice low. "You're not alone in this." Her silver eyes locked onto his, searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe strength. He wasn't sure if she found it, but she nodded, exhaling sharply. "Then stay." He nodded. He wasn't going anywhere. The process was unlike anything the doctors had seen before. The hybrid child wasn't just developing rapidly, it was adapting in real time. Its biology was rewriting itself, responding to the stress, the environment, the urgency of its own birth. It wasn't just being born. It was evolving. Outside, the threat loomed. The Keepers had found them. Daniel heard the distant echoes of battle through the reinforced walls. Explosions. Gunfire. The facility was holding, but not for long. He had fought in enough battles to recognize the pattern. They weren't trying to breach immediately. They were cutting off escape routes, forcing them into a corner. They were preparing for the final strike. The lead doctor turned, his face pale. "She can't be moved. The birth is happening now." Daniel clenched his jaw. He had one job: to protect them. The Keepers weren't going to wait. He turned to Lyria. "Whatever happens, you finish this. You bring that child into the world." Her breathing was ragged, but her gaze was steady. "And you will keep it safe." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Daniel stepped into the corridor, sealing the door behind him. The security teams were holding their ground, but barely. The Keepers moved like shadows, precise, deadly. They weren't just soldiers, they were assassins. Daniel took position at the front line. He didn't hesitate. Every shot was calculated, every movement a step ahead of the enemy. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something worth protecting. One by one, the Keepers fell. But they kept coming. A detonation rocked the facility. The outer perimeter had been breached. Time was running out. Then the sound cut through the chaos. A cry. Not a scream of pain. Not the roar of battle. A newborn's cry. Daniel's chest tightened. It was here. The child was alive. The keepers heard it too. And that was when they changed tactics. They weren't here to fight anymore. They were here to take. Daniel moved before they did. He pushed forward, relentless, cutting them down before they could reach the medical bay. He didn't think, didn't stop. Every bullet, every strike, every decision was made with one goal: get to the child. By the time he reached the door, his body was screaming, his mind running on pure instinct. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, but he didn't care. The room was quiet. The doctors stood frozen, staring at the small figure in Lyria's arms. The child. It wasn't just a hybrid. It was something new. Its skin carried a faint bioluminescent glow, shifting between human warmth and ethery coolness. Its eyes, golden and piercing, locked onto Daniel the moment he stepped inside. Lyria was exhausted but alive. She looked at him, and for the first time since this all began, she smiled. Daniel stepped forward, cautious. Is it? The lead doctor barely found his voice. Perfectly stable. The immunity markers are present. It worked. Lyria exhaled, holding the child close. Then we have hope. The battle wasn't over. The war wasn't won. But for the first time, they had a future worth fighting for. The facility was silent except for the distant echoes of gunfire. Daniel stood at the entrance of the medical bay, rifle in hand, body tense. The child had been born. The war hadn't stopped. If anything, it had only escalated. The keepers weren't going to retreat. Not now. Not ever. Lyria held the newborn close, exhaustion evident in every breath she took. But her grip was strong, protective. The child's golden eyes were open, staring at the world with something too sharp, too aware for a newborn. The hybrid was different. They had always expected that, but seeing it was something else entirely. The lead scientist checked the readings. Its DNA is stabilizing faster than we anticipated. He sounded both amazed and terrified. It's not just immune to the virus. It's rewriting the immunity sequence in real time. Lyria's voice was hoarse. That means we can replicate it? The scientist hesitated. If we get enough time to analyze it, yes. Time was the one thing they didn't have. The alarms blared again. Daniel knew what that meant. The keepers were making their final push. The outer perimeter was gone. The security teams were buying them minutes, not hours. He turned to Lyria. We need to move. She tightened her hold on the child. He's too fragile to be moved so soon. Daniel didn't argue. He understood. But staying wasn't an option. A soldier burst through the door, wounded but alive. They've breached the lower levels. We've got a few minutes before they reach this floor. The scientist paled. We can't let them take the child. Daniel made a decision. We split up. I'll lead them away. You take the secondary exit. Get to the transport. Lyria shook her head. No. He met her gaze, unwavering. You don't have a choice. She looked down at the child, then back at him. Promise me. He already knew what she was asking. He nodded. I won't let them take him. The scientist gathered the data drives, shoving them into a secure case. We need to move now. The plan was simple. Daniel would head toward the main corridor, making as much noise as possible. Draw the keepers in. Give Lyria and the team the time they needed to get out. He stepped into the hallway, the echoes of approaching footsteps growing louder. His grip on his rifle tightened. He had faced worse odds before. The first wave of keepers appeared, weapons raised. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired, moving fast, forcing them to react instead of plan. They returned fire, but he was already gone, slipping through the corridors, leading them deeper into the facility. He could hear them speaking in their native tongue, frustrated, angry. Good. That meant they weren't thinking clearly. He kept moving, clearing another hallway, taking down 2 more enemies before ducking into a storage area. He checked his ammo. Not enough. He had to make this count. The comms crackled. It was the scientist. We're at the transport, prepping for launch. Daniel exhaled. Good. They had made it. Then the door exploded inward. The force threw him back, his vision blurring for a second. When he looked up, he saw him, the keeper leader, the scarred Ithari who had sworn that no hybrid would be allowed to exist. "You fight well, human," the keeper said, stepping forward, weapon aimed. "But this ends now." Daniel pushed himself to his feet, blood dripping from a gash on his arm. "Yeah," he muttered. "It does." The fight was brutal. The keeper was stronger, faster. But Daniel had something he didn't: sheer, unrelenting will. He dodged the first strike, countered with a shot to the leg. The keeper staggered but didn't fall. Daniel didn't let up. He drove his knife into the alien's side, twisting hard. The keeper roared in pain, slamming Daniel against the wall. Pain shot through his ribs. Maybe cracked, maybe broken. Didn't matter. He wasn't stopping. The keeper raised his weapon for the final shot. A sharp, piercing sound filled the room. Daniel saw it before he fully registered it. A small figure standing in the doorway, golden eyes glowing. The hybrid child. The keeper hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Daniel moved. One shot, straight to the head. The keeper fell, lifeless. Daniel staggered, catching his breath, looking at the child. It had moved faster than any newborn should have. But more than that, there was something in its eyes. Something aware. Lyria appeared behind him, breathless. He wanted to find you." Daniel exhaled, exhaustion settling in. Looks like he did. The facility was crumbling. The last of the keepers were being eliminated by Earth's reinforcements. The war wasn't over, but this battle was. They boarded the transport, the engines roaring to life. As they lifted off, Daniel finally let himself sit down, let himself breathe. Lyria held the child close, looking at him with something unreadable. "We changed everything today." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we did." The world wasn't the same anymore. The war had shifted, and humanity had just gained its greatest weapon, its greatest hope.